All right, we're now live streaming. I've got 1 minute to the hour, Katie.
Thank you. Sounds good. Hi, Sam. Good to see you.
And we're off.
I have 6 o'clock. I'm gonna start the webinar and we should see attendees start to join us.
Perfect. Thank you.
Good evening, everyone.
Hey,
Hi, Cynthia. Hi, Christina. Thanks for coming.
Hi, thanks for having me. Nice to see your face, Catherine. Let's see who else is here. No one that I've yet talked to on the phone, but good to see the rest of you as well.
You've got Jeremy and Maria on staff with the Community Board 7.
Hi. And I'm Christine. I'm a council member of Yelis's office. Sorry, just forgetting to introduce myself.
No problem. Nice meeting you.
Nice meeting you.
So we're going to let folks trickle in. We probably are expecting maybe double the number of folks that are on right now. So give people a few minute or two.
A couple of people left already.
Couple people left.
They might be having problems.
They're like, this isn't the community board meeting. I thought it was. I'll give it another like two minutes or so. Thanks everybody for joining so far. Okay, great. So I see some committee members on, which is fantastic. Great, thanks everybody. Okay. And I have the ability to share my screen, right? Yes, now I do. Okay,
Yes.
great. Thank you. So if I do that, that should come up, right? The agenda. Awesome. Okay, lovely. Thank you. All right. Thanks everyone for joining the Community Board 7 Last Mile Special Subcommittee on Last Mile Trucking. We've got folks who are still joining and some of our panelists that are still joining, but I, again, recognize and appreciate that you all made it here at the top of the hour too, so appreciate that. I will get started. I'm Catherine Katie Walsh, a Community Board 7 member and chair of the Special Subcommittee. We've got, I see a few of the members of the committee who are also on tonight, which is great, and we'll do attendance. And we will do that in one quick second. I just wanted to share the agenda at the top, just to share that I'll go through the welcome. We'll have some time for public comment at the top. So if you want to raise your hand, that'll be something that you're able to do. And I'll have the support of Jeremy and Maria to do that period. And then we'll have legislative updates from Councilmember Avila's office, as well as Assemblymember Mantegna's office. And then hear a little bit more about the Last Mile Coalition and how to get involved. I've got a couple of representatives, Uprose and Earth Justice, I believe, are also here. DOT was invited to speak. They are not attending this meeting, but they have said that they will be at our April meeting and just finalizing that date and time to get out to everybody. So there will be another meeting in April with DOT, and we'll be inviting the Department of City Planning as well. So Department of Transportation, DOT, and Department of City Planning, DCP. And then we'll go to our public comments again. So this is definitely an opportunity to hear from everybody who's here. With that, we can just do attendance at the top, and then I'll say a few more things. We'll get started.
Thank you, Katie. So I am going to mute everybody right now. Board members, committee members, when I call your name, please unmute yourself, acknowledge your name, and then mute yourself again. If you are a board member but not a committee member, I am not going to call your name, but I will write your name down. Let's start with Catherine Walsh.
Present.
Thank you. Nick Azadian. Stacy Boyd. Gladys Bruno. Cynthia Felix.
Present.
Thank you. John Fontillis.
Here.
Thank you. Cynthia Gonzalez.
Here.
Thank you. Zach Jacy. Christina Lem. Sam Sierra.
Present. Good evening, everyone.
Thank you. Roll is called. Dogfight needs to be averted.
Thanks, Jeremy. Okay, I stopped my screen share and just to say that we're gonna say a few things, and then I'm gonna open up to public comment. And the way public comment works is if you want to raise your hand, then we'll be able to hear, and we have a kind of timer as well to kind of help us along the way. So as a revisit to this committee, we've gathered over the last couple of months. Our first kickoff meeting was May 6, 2021, where we have had these discussions on last mile trucking, but specifically this special subcommittee being formed and meeting. Our first meeting was on May 6th. We have met now a series of, we've had 3 additional meetings for the special subcommittee. The topics that we've covered in that period of time is highlighting the issues, identifying the fact of the growing impacts that we're experiencing within Sunset Park, within this community board of these last mile districts and what's to come, compounded by all the other challenges that we are dealing with already as a community and as a community board district. We met also with Red Hook, which is, our neighboring within the same city council and assembly district, legislative district, Senate district, to be able to talk specifically about shared challenges. So that was a joint meeting that we had in July. And then in Community Board 7, we came together again in October, where we heard a couple of sort of consultative questions about types of legislation that could possibly be introduced at both the city level and the state level, some kind of questions that were being posed. We also heard, over the last couple of months, there was a meeting that hosted Department of Transportation and Department of City Planning, kind of explaining the bounds of what they can do within current regulation and what is possible. And again, we heard some different types of solutions, possibilities of what could be done. Had some really great examples that came in from organizations that are presenting again tonight, Uprose, Earth Justice, on what we've seen in other communities and other localities. And we had a case study that came to us from California, specifically just to kind of provoke some conversation. So our community board 7 met, and as a full community board, we passed a letter in December of 2021. That the letter specifically outlining the types of meetings that we'd hosted over the last couple of months, the questions have been posed, the problems have been identified, and then calling on leadership, elected leadership, as well as the agencies within this new administration on what action would be taken to remedy these, right? And it's both this question of what is possible under current regulation, but also what are we going to do now with the challenges that we're facing. So where we are today, meeting in March, between now and this period of time in March, is we have a couple of different initiatives that and legislative options that have also come up. There's a lot of different conversations happening in the community. Here is a presentation today that we'll have from Councilmember Alexa Vilas's office, State Assembly Member Marcelo Matanias's office, talking about city and state. And then we'll also hear about some actions and organizing, as well, kind of the local level with organizations like Uprose and Earth Justice. This is not the complete picture, and we need, as we have this conversation within the community board, what is the community board role in all of this is bringing together and really demonstrating what types of steps need to take place in order to address a lot of the challenges, again, that we've articulated over and over again within these meetings around congestion, air quality, safety, transit, being just a few of the things that are coming up. So with that, I've kind of signposted. We've got this April meeting that will come up very quickly. We'll get that date out to you as soon as possible. That will be with Department of Transportation and Department of City Planning, maybe others. And then in this meeting today, we will have public comment, which will start shortly. Then we'll go to our city and state reps, and then turn to Uprose and Earth Justice and go back to public comment as well. So with that, I would love to ask for Jeremy and Maria's help. We'll do public comment 3 minutes on the clock. If you wanted to raise a question or share anything in particular before we dive in, that'd be really helpful. I will, I guess at the top of this, also ask our board members if you wanted to comment. This would be a good time. We can sort of give you an opportunity now before we jump straight into public comment from the public. So I'm looking to see if there's any first board members with their hands up, and then we'll go to the hands from attendees, which I know is up as well. I do see hands up from attendees. Looking at the board members, I don't think I see any right now. Nope. Okay.
Katie, would you like me to start calling members of the public?
Yes, that would be fantastic. Thanks for your help.
No problem. I have Jim Tampakis first. You could unmute yourself. You have 3 minutes to speak.
Okay, I'm Jim Tampakis. I'm located in Red Hook. I'm a business owner. I am very concerned about all these last mile warehouses coming in. I just want you to be aware that on the western side of Red Hook, we have 2 Amazon sites that are currently being built. And we have a third site, which is RXR Development is in the process. Tomorrow, they're doing a BSA to basically take over. They're looking for a BSA variance to take over a street that intersects their property. And their objective is to put up a 1.1 million square foot facility. That's going to be 7 stories. It's on the water, right across from the FedEx site that's being built on the other side of the Gowanus. It looks like, so with the 1.1 million square feet tomorrow with their BSA, if it gets approved, the majority of that traffic coming out of Red Hook, I do believe that the empties are going to be coming out onto Hamilton Avenue, then onto 3rd Avenue and down 3rd Avenue and entering on 60th Street back onto the Gowanus and going over the Verrazano Bridge. So unfortunately, our problem is your problem. And I just want you to be aware. And if anybody is available tomorrow to join in on that BSA meeting with CB6, it would be appreciated if you want to voice your opinion. All of these sites are right on the water. And, you know, I'm a very big promoter of doing water. And I think that we need to all basically get all of these developers to start thinking about water. The EDC's got their waterfront plan with their Dock NYC sites, and it's something that really needs to be looked at. That's all I have to say. Thank you.
Thanks, Jim. And if you can share that, I know we've been in email communications. If you can share the BSA link, that'd be appreciated.
Sure.
Thanks.
Thank you. I have Robert Kunkel next. Robert, you could unmute yourself.
Just got it. My name is Robert Kunkel. I represent a company called First Harvest Navigation. We're moving products across Long Island Sound from Connecticut into Long Island and out into the Hamptons on a hybrid catamaran with no environmental impact. We've joined the meeting. Portside, Carolina from Portside let us know about the meeting. And we've been operating with waterborne transportation of last mile trucking products for about 2 years now, successfully out of Long Island. And we plan on moving the hybrid into the Brooklyn and New York area and start to deal with some of the issues that all of you are experiencing here, trying to remove congestion from the local roadways. We do last mile by electric bicycle, cargo bicycle, and we also take a lot of the trucking product off of the streets and onto the waterways. And we just wanted everybody to know that we're listening to the meeting and seeing if we can bring the boat down, maybe do a tour on the vessel and show everybody how we're handling some of the congestion issues in Connecticut and Long Island using waterborne transportation. And again, this is a hybrid vessel, no noise, completely gentrified, no environmental impact, no emissions. It's all run by a lithium battery, and it carries 20,000 pounds of cargo and 50 passengers. We've worked with EDC, looking for sites where we can dock. We're in the process of trying to connect with IKEA and see if they have interest on their waterborne areas, and just be interested to see how everyone is looking at this issue. I was the chairman of the Short Sea Shipping Cooperative for the federal government for 10 years. So we have a lot of information and data, and we finally found a niche with less than full load trucking to be able to move both food products and other products on the boat.
Thank you. I think I heard an offer to go out on the boat as well, Roberts. Maybe we'll follow up with you for what that could look like.
Thank you.
Thank you. I have Sasha Bien-Ami. Sasha, you can unmute yourself.
Yes, good afternoon.
And Sasha, I accidentally muted you, so I'm sorry. You can unmute yourself again.
Okay, that's it. Can you hear me now?
Yes, we can.
Okay, good afternoon. My name is Sasha Bien-Ami. I live on 20th Street between 6th and 7th Avenue. At the bottom of 20th Street, they are building a last mile facility. It's under construction. Demolition is well underway. I've noticed cranes, pile drivers, that are in place already. My concern is traffic traveling down 20th Street. This has been historically a problem street with vehicular truck traffic, that is. They will be able to, it's a home run reaching that facility. Is there a way? My question is, can they implement entrance and exits from the BQE, 38th Street, 39th Street, if you look at the area, which is pretty open, and perhaps even somewhere along between 38th Street and 20th Street, to keep the trucks on the highway. What's going to happen there is if there's too much traffic on 4th Avenue, 3rd Avenue, I believe the trucks coming in from Staten Island will continue on to the Prospect Expressway and get off at the 10th Avenue exit and travel straight down. Another concern is also the freight coming in from Kennedy Airport. There's never been a proper route. What I've observed is there is no entrance from Church Avenue to the Prospect Expressway, making the trucks travel through the neighborhoods, namely up or down McDonald Avenue and then onto 20th Street again. If that is a problem, can that be included in the infrastructure plans that they have? Can they put the funding into to build this access to keep the trucks on the highway? I have another minute left. The idea, this would go a long way for fuel efficiency and anti-pollution, because the idea is that as long as the vehicles are moving, they are consuming less fuel. The big problem is the stop and go. Get the vehicles moving again is where they use up most of the energy. That's all I have to say. Thank you.
Thank you, Sasha.
Thank you. I have Ruben Colon next. Ruben, you can unmute yourself.
Thank you, Jeremy. Ruben Colon, longtime Sunset Parker. I have some information and I have 2 questions. Let me hit you with the questions first for the committee. Have labor standards with regard to workers building these projects been considered by the committee? And second question, I don't know how much, well, it's not really a question. I have information on RXR's facility. They're currently doing test boring prior to test piles. The contractor on site is known to us to be East Coast Drilling. They're currently on the 20th Street site and soon to be, based on our information, at the Red Hook location, which is, I think, 671 Court Street. FYI, they are being investigated by us and some of the other trades for wage fraud, unfair labor practices, and endangering workers. We're close to bringing a case with them, against them, with the district attorney's office at some point. I can't really elaborate too much on that. Dove Hertz owns the site at, and I'm sure some committee members may already know, at 20th Street, and he also owns 2 sites, one of which is an Amazon at 55 Bay Street in Red Hook, and he owns 640 Columbia Street, also in Red Hook, both of which went fully non-union. There is a 3rd site at 271 or 281 Richard Street. That site, we did have some involvement to some degree with regard to the structure. I'm not sure if it's an Amazon. I believe it is an Amazon. I don't know. I had a question with regard to Amazon. Are any of these 2 sites, the one in Red Hook, 671 Court Street, and the one here on in Sunset Park, are they going to be Amazons? Is that confirmed? Thank you.
Thank you. do not know if the Sunset Park one is Amazon, and I have no idea about Red Hook personally.
Yeah, and just to say too, Ruben, if you want to, you said you're a Sunset Park resident, and you also talked a little bit about the union organizing. Do you want to identify anything else about your background, Sunset, and are you with any affiliation or organization? Oh, sorry, he's muted
I'm
again because
sorry,
it's
I
public
revoked his
comment.
permission to talk. I have to give.
Sorry.
give-
Okay.
All right. Ruben, you can unmute yourself again.
Just if you wanted to add
Thank you, Jeremy.
an organization that you're affiliated with, Ruben?
Yeah, my apologies. I was limited on time. I'm a union organizer technically. I'm an area standards representative for the Carpenters Union, the New York City District Council of Carpenters. I'm familiar with Community Board 7. I've been here before with regard to Industry City and so on. I grew up in Sunset Park, 1973, PS 94, Dewey Junior High School, and so on and so on. I don't currently live in the area. I'm in CB11's area. I'm actually on the board as well. But yeah, just sharing information, gathering information. My concern is responsible development, to be quite frank, so I'm approaching this from a different perspective.
Thank you, Ruben. Appreciate you sharing
You're
that.
welcome.
And thanks, Jeremy. So we'll go to the next section. I'll just say, we'll talk a little bit more about this, but these are as of right projects. So the community board does not have any insight or authority requirements that we can make in terms of even these things being built. What definitely not on the labor practices and standards of what they're doing. And that's one of the many challenges that we have is these are facilities, or these as of right facilities, very much limiting scope. So we are going to move to the next section. So I'm going to start with city, then go to state. So I will ask Christina, who has Batego has joined us. Hopefully I've said your last name right. Introduce yourself, but who's joined us from Councilmember Alexa Vilas's office. Thank you.
Sure. Hi, everyone. Christina Botedo, council member of Vilas's Legislative and Budget Director. Glad to be here with all of you working on this important issue. I guess I would preface by saying, as we work on this issue in our office and collectively, I think we need to think about how we broaden our reach. This is very much an issue that impacts our district, and I think our district is the most vocal about it. But I would love to hear ideas, or maybe if folks in this group can start to share with friends and family members this issue. We do know that it impacts parts of the Bronx. We know that it impacts parts of Queens. And if we can start to make the case that this is a citywide issue, I think it'll go a long way towards accomplishing our goals. So certainly our office will continue to work on that. We're thinking about, and I'll talk about this in a minute, legislation that we plan on introducing soon, and broadening our coalition by bringing more council members into this conversation and how it impacts their communities. So just something to think about so that we can make headway, particularly with Department for City Planning, right? I think they're going to be sticklers. They're not going to want to hear that it just impacts Sunset Park or Red Hook. We really got to think about how to broaden this. So let me start with that. And then just taking a step back, obviously the council member has been in office since January. We are thinking about this issue every day since January. We started, and I'll be quick on these sort of front pieces. We started with thinking about how do we submit a text amendment? How do we do a special permit? And that kicked off a series of conversations with our land use committee. And you all may know this, but in case you don't, the city council actually is very limited in its ability to pass a text amendment or special permit. So I think there's another strategy happening outside of city council that will continue to push forward on that front. And we will continue to be supportive of that effort in whatever way possible. In the meantime, we have started to think about creative ways in which the city council does have jurisdiction. And what we've come up with is basically a license structure. So this would be similar to how a laundromat gets licensed or a dry cleaner gets licensed. It would be through DCWP. So we do have some draft legislation ready. We're thinking of possibly introducing this legislation in early April. But during this gap in time between now and then, we are working with advocates in the space and community members in the space to give us feedback on the legislation. So I'll talk about I have my notes here, so forgive me for looking at my notes. The legislation is a little bit complex. So I'll just talk about it in broad sweeps. So the first thing it does is it defines a last mile distribution center. I think part of the problem to date has been that there is no definition in the law, right? So this allows the facilities to be treated like warehouses, but we know that they're not warehouses in the traditional sense. So they need a new definition, right? So we're thinking about that definition, and we hope that our advocates will help us flesh out that definition a little bit more. And that's a really important piece. It establishes a license structure. So, again, because the city council is limited in its jurisdiction, the first draft of this legislation, I guess we're now on the second draft, it became apparent that we were preempted in a number of areas. We couldn't require specific environmental components of this law because we were preempted by the federal government. And then maybe it was a state level issue. There was another piece called due process where we couldn't treat this business differently than other businesses. So the license structure was a way to sort of capture those things creatively. So the license structure requires that the commissioner grant a license only to those applicants who have not violated any city, state, or federal law relating to worker protections or protection of the environment. So that was sort of a workaround with not being preempted on, again, the labor piece and the environmental piece. So the fee is $1,000 for the application for the license that is renewed each year. It also would be retroactive. It would all existing facilities would need to apply for the license, and certainly any going forward would need to apply for the license. Obviously another big issue with last mile facilities is clustering, right? We don't want these facilities one right on top of the other for all of the reasons that you all have enumerated, right? It's an environmental hazard, it's a traffic congestion, it's a strain on the infrastructure, all of those reasons. It's hard for us in our sort of limited scope to get at clustering. But what we've come up with, and hopefully this works in conjunction with any future efforts on a text amendment, is a community cap. So the Commissioner of Consumer Affairs would work with the Commissioner of the Department of Transportation to come up with a cap within each community district. Those two commissioners would work together to figure out what informs that cap. Is it the existence of existing facilities? Is it about emissions? Is it about truck traffic? Is it about all of it? And those caps will be required to be reviewed each year and anytime a district boundary changes. So a cap, of course, we hope this limits the number of facilities that can be built, but doesn't necessarily address facilities being built next to each other. There is also a vehicular traffic component part of the legislation. which requires the commissioner to submit a transportation safety plan to DOT. The safety plan would have to include a description of planned routing and scheduling of delivery vehicle movements to and from the center, include an analysis of the volume of deliveries traveling to and from. There must be a reduction plan for the number of deliveries, and also a plan to reduce collision risk, traffic death, and parking violation. And this plan will also inform the caps that are established. So that's it in a nutshell. Again, we think this is a really creative approach, and a way that the city council can have jurisdiction over a complicated issue. Obviously, there's things happening at the state level. I think just all, in this situation, all hands on deck, all strategies on the table. This is just one tool in the toolbox. But we're excited to bring it forward. We're excited to work with all the community partners, and we certainly look forward to expanding the conversation so that we can make it a citywide issue and really present a strong case to the Department of City Planning. And I think that's it from me. I am not familiar with the format here, but if anybody has questions, I'm happy to take questions.
Yeah, and I thank you for going through that. There were, without getting too in the weeds, there were two things that you just talked about in terms of helping inform the decision making for what is being proposed. Due process and preemption. Could you just give like a 2-second definition to bring folks on in terms of how what that means to shape this type of legislation?
Sure. So preemption just means that, sort of in the hierarchy of government, if, a municipality wants to make a law, does it somehow interfere with a state level law? And, it's sort of like a trifecta, right? Or does it interfere with a federal law? So there is federal jurisdiction over environmental laws. We can't come up with a municipal environmental rule without being preempted by the federal government. So in other words, we are blocked by the federal government from creating that type of legislation because it's their jurisdiction. And due process, I'm a little fuzzy on due process, but the idea there is that we can't treat any particular entity differently than another entity. So if a last mile facility is a business, then we must treat it like a business. And we basically have no reason to act with prejudice towards them. So, I think the first step there is defining last mile facilities. And that helps us be able to say, well, they are a little bit different than some other business, a warehouse, for example. And so how can we address legislatively those particular differences? I hope that makes sense.
Okay, yes. And I'm going to ask one other question, and then I'll ask if the community board members have any questions. My follow-up is around this with this licensing and preemption. So you've talked about if it doesn't violate or if not granting the license if it violates some sort of city, state, or federal legislation. So as you're thinking about this, are the existing, do you have the right kinds of state laws in place right now to sort of be in that situation, or are you reliant on state level legislation changing at the same time?
Yeah, I mean, that is really with regards to environmental and labor law. Again, we can't create legislation on those two areas. We're relying on, once this legislation is introduced, we're relying obviously on existing law. But certainly, so I guess also to back up, there's another concept here called municipal home rule. Okay, so municipal home rule says that we have to narrowly craft legislation about one particular issue. So we would love to get at labor standards a bit more. We might be preempted on that. But even if we're not, municipal home rule says that we can't, on this legislation, introduce within it a whole new body of work, basically. We can only deal with the last mile facilities in this. We can't also deal with labor. So as this legislation goes through the process, I think, of course, we're going to hear from advocates in this space. If we get a hearing, of course, during the hearing, some of these labor issues and environmental issues are going to come up. And we hope through that we'll hear what needs to be improved, right? Especially with regards to labor and environmental. So whether that means something comes up that we do have jurisdiction over, and we can introduce sort of complementary legislation on that very narrow issue. And then certainly if there are state level issues that come up, we will definitely work with our state level electeds on those particular issues and say, like, hey, in the hearing it came up that we really need improvement in X area of the labor law. Let's work together to get that to happen on the state level. So as this legislation stands, we have to rely on what is existing. And then as we hear about improvements that can be made, we can introduce, insofar as we have jurisdiction, sort of complementary legislation.
Okay, so I'm going to just make a comment on this and I'll open up to board members, which is that in so much as what the state does, right? And I think that's why it'll be really important to hear today from the assembly members, Matinias's office. I actually think the assemblywoman's here to be able to talk about the state level legislation. And the other comment is just probably what, others community board members are also thinking, which will come up in questions. What do we do now in this in-between time, right? Between now and whenever any of this happens. And I think because we're really feeling that, and I think we're like very much looking for solutions. So I do want to ask board members if you wanted to ask any questions. Christina's not going anywhere, and then we'll hear from the assembly member's office, but are there any hands up from board members? And again, we'll come back to public comment in a few minutes, but
I don't see any hands up right now.
Great. Okay, that's no problem. So I see Jenny. Let me see. I think Jenny from Assemblyman Martinez's office. So Christina, we'll hold on to you for another minute, a few minutes, if that's okay, and then just go to Jenny.
Yes. Hi, everybody. Sorry the assembly member isn't able to make it today. We are in the last 2 weeks of the state budget process. So things are a little hectic on our end, but I'm really excited to be here to hear the update from Christina and to share a little bit more about what we've been working on. Katie, do you want me to share my screen?
Yes, if Jeremy's able to make you.
Permission to do that. Hang on one second.
It's probably easier than me going through them, Jenny.
Okay.
You can share your screen now.
All right, let me see if this will work. Okay, can you guys see these slides?
Yes.
Okay, so I tried to make some slides to make sure that I hit all of the key points. We are at a place with the state level intervention where things have formulated and taken a lot of shape. We're kind of at the stage of starting to build support for this intervention and are almost at the stage of actually formally introducing this legislation and having it be live and accessible to everybody. So I'm going to share. Oh, no, that's not what I'm trying to do. I'm going to present. Okay. So I wasn't sure how much detail I should go into about report on what's happening here. Sorry, can you guys still see the slides?
We see the first page, the indirect source rule.
Okay, cool. Okay, we're good. My computer is deciding to update at the same time. But so I wasn't sure how much detail I should go into about just the overall problem and the context. I assume, seeing the familiar faces on this call, a lot of people are, already pretty deep in the weeds. But so I'll just go through some of this context and background really, really quickly. And I really want to get to, where we are, what the legislation currently looks like, see if there's any feedback and questions, and then talk about, the rest of the strategy and what this looks like from here on out. So with that, Christina's totally right. One of the biggest challenges with tackling this problem at a policy and legislative level is the fact that last mile trucking doesn't have its own definition as written into existing law. So part of the exercise here is for us to try to develop that definition and figure out which mechanisms exist at which levels of government that we can use to kind of slow down the proliferation of these facilities, if not, stop them altogether in some cases. So I'm sure you guys have already talked about this. This is just a map of what we currently know. Many, many thanks to Dan Wiley for putting this together. I feel like I return to this over and over again. I was listening to Jim earlier and yeah, alarmed to hear that there's another site being looked at, 728 Court Street. Definitely want to find out more at the CB6 landmarks meeting tomorrow, but this is just what we currently know. 6 facilities between Red Hook and Sunset Park. And we know that without any interventions, many, many more are probably going to be coming. So this is a rendering of the Sunset Park facility, which is supposed to be, I believe, one of the larger ones. And this is what we currently know right now about what it'll look like. This is from a news article. So we had come and I think presented at CB at this subcommittee, I think it was last year in October, and we were kind of talking through potential legislative interventions. At that point, we had, a few different options on the table, and we hadn't exactly narrowed down and decided on which option we were going to pursue. We have since made that decision, but in just evaluating how to go about this, we wanted to consider all of the different impacts that last mile trucking was having on the community. So here you can kind of see an overview of all the different impacts. The key, concern for our office when it comes to this issue is really just that this is an issue of environmental justice. It's not just about the fact that these facilities are arriving, but it's about where these facilities are arriving. So we know that these facilities are often coming to low-income communities of color because the land is cheapest and it's closest to industrial space, which is space that where this can proceed without layers of review. I want to highlight, so I know that Kaveh is here in the audience. I thought I saw him earlier. So there was a report that came out from Consumer Reports that really highlighted this issue and highlighted this issue as one of environmental justice. There was a survey done by Kaveh and his team about where Amazon facilities exist around the country. And overwhelmingly, the study found that most of Amazon's warehouses are in neighborhoods with a disproportionately higher number of people of color and low-income residents. It was very, very thorough. And I'm just pulling out one of the data visualizations that Kaveh's team put together. So as you can see here, this is, I think, a nationwide study. Amazon has 508 warehouses where there are more residents of color than the metropolitan area median, whereas only 214 warehouses have fewer residents of color than the metropolitan area median. So we can see kind of, what's going on with the overall trend. So that gets us to what is the state level intervention that we are pursuing? Specifically, it's called the Indirect Source Rule, and ISR, as we will be referring to it more and more as we start to really push this through the legislature. So what is it and why is it necessary? So we had been researching what kind of interventions would make sense at the state level. And what's interesting about the state level is that there's already a review and permitting process that exists for air quality. At the state level, environmental parameters are regulated, and there's already a review process for stationary facilities. If you are a stationary facility that is supposed to be a big emitter, a heavy polluter, you're already required to go and get state level permits, such as a Title V permit, a state air facility permit, and you have to actually, be approved through the permitting process in order to start operations. The problem with this is obviously it only applies to stationary sources or sources on contiguous properties, and it does not take into account pollutants and emissions from mobile sources such as trucks. That's clearly what we're encountering here. In a lot of these warehouses, the facilities themselves don't actually emit a lot of pollution. It's actually the transportation associated with these facilities. So we had to think about, what is a process that we could create? What is a new process that we could implement that would start to regulate these what's called indirect sources of pollution? So that brings us to the indirect source rule. Christina was talking earlier about kind of preemption and having to be aware of these different levels of government and which level of government has the authority to regulate which areas of our lives, I guess. So what's good about this situation, I guess we're kind of lucky, is that there is a specific carve out under the Federal Clean Air Act that gives states the authority to regulate emissions from indirect sources. So things such as trucks. We know that states have this ability and this authority. It's up to the states on whether they want to actually use this authority. So theoretically, we could implement restrictions and requirements for indirect source emissions. Under a theoretical indirect source rule, warehouse operators would be responsible for emissions from indirect sources, including trucks. And this has so far been implemented only in one other jurisdiction around the country. It's being done in California, the South Coast Air Quality Management District, and I believe it's being investigated and pursued in some other geographies as well. So we, at the end of last year, had started looking into the indirect source rule as the intervention that made the most sense. There was discussion about, doing some sort of emergency moratorium. We understand that this is an emergency situation and that it is a very urgent situation. However, when we were investigating whether a moratorium was possible, one thing that kept coming up was that because these facilities are currently not regulated or are currently not under the oversight of the state, there's actually no mechanism upon which to build a moratorium. So we were kind of stuck. First, we have to regulate it. And once the regulation is in place, we could say, DEC is now instructed to no longer approve these permits, hence, effectively implementing a moratorium. But we're not there yet. We're far from being there. So the question for us is, how can we start to move in that direction and start to lay the regulatory groundwork to allow for that to happen? We know that, this should have happened already yesterday. So we started putting together an indirect source rule, working with coalition partners in the Last Mile Coalition, I believe many of which are here, groups such as Earth Justice, Uprose in Sunset Park, NICJA, The Point in the Bronx, and many others that I'm probably leaving out. But we started actually sketching out, what could an indirect source rule for New York State actually look like? So this is the proposal. I want to make sure I can cover this in a very clear way. So we are proposing indirect source rule legislation that would require DEC to establish rules and procedures for 3 different mechanisms. The first is a facility by facility review of existing warehouses. So, in our discussions, there was a lot of kind of questions and thinking around, does this apply only to new warehouses? Does it apply to those that are already existing? How can we have this law kind of implement like a backward looking element? Because we know these facilities are already here and they're already causing harm and damage. So we wanted to have an element that could review what's already there. So DEC is instructed to consider review requirements, such as an air emissions reduction and mitigation plan for each facility. This would happen, I believe, annually. And so it would allow us to get a handle on, things that are already there, facilities that are already built. The second element of this legislation would be to create a permitting process for any new developments or major modifications. So this is like kind of what I view to be like the core and the teeth of this piece of legislation. A permitting process would trigger CEQA review. So there would have to be environmental impact studies. And it would also give the public an opportunity for input. So for example, there was a recent fracked gas plant fight in Astoria, Queens, where the facility had to go through CEQA review in order to get its permit to generate energy. And the public was able to generate enough opposition that it actually resulted in this permit being denied. So by creating a formal process and subjecting these facilities to this formal process, it creates an opening for the public to start organizing, to start educating each other, to start to build the amount of momentum that would allow one of these facilities or more to be stopped. And then the third part of this legislation is annual and publicly disclosed reporting of truck trips, routes, the number of jobs, the types of jobs, as well as the amount and type of renewable infrastructure that has been built on these sites. So this would happen, warehouse operators would be required to do this annually. It would be required to be published on a publicly accessible website, giving us a little more transparency into what exactly is happening at these facilities. So this is a topic of much discussion and debate. What is the universe of facilities that this law would have to apply to? As currently defined in our draft legislation, we are applying this law to any heavy distribution warehouse, which is defined as any warehouse that is 50,000 square feet or greater, that is also one of the three below types of warehouses, either a fulfillment center, a parcel hub, or parcel sorting facility. And the reason we have this definition is because we wanted to cover last mile warehouses, but we also wanted to cover those warehouses that are kind of adjacent to last mile. Last mile, as we defined it on the second slide, is a warehouse that's serving as the endpoint right before it goes to the parcel goes to a consumer's home. So we know that there's other warehouses out there that have, a similar kind of frequency of trips as a last mile warehouse, but may not be like defined as the last stop before a parcel reaches a consumer's home. So we wanted to make sure we were capturing all of the facilities that would, demonstrate similar traffic patterns, similar usage patterns, and make sure we're being as comprehensive as possible. Who has to comply? So the entity that has to actually comply with this law will be the warehouse operator. And we know that with some of these facilities, they end up subcontracting out various parts of the operations. So this would be any entity that conducts the day-to-day operations at a heavy distribution warehouse, including those operations that are conducted through the use of third-party contractors. So we wanted to make sure we were also capturing, you couldn't get out of this law, you couldn't get out of complying with this law just because your company is not actually conducting the operations, you're outsourcing it to a different contractor. So we're at this point now where, we've been refining the legislation over the last few months. There's still a number of outstanding questions that, we want to think through with partners such as you guys all here, but also people who aren't here. And I wanted to boil it down to just kind of the three key things that have been coming up over and over. The first of which is, what funding requirements would be necessary to make sure that this law can succeed. So we realize that this is in some way, a little bit ambitious in the sense that we are creating an entirely new permitting process and a scope regulation for the state Department of Environmental Conservation. So, they can't just make something up, create a new process out of thin air. It takes staff resources, it takes research, it takes refinement, It takes time. So we want to make sure that we are, giving the agency enough resources to be able to implement this successfully. There's also a bit of a concern around maybe some smaller warehouse operators, not the Amazons of the world, not the FedExes or the UPSs of the world, but if there were to be some smaller players that aren't as technically sophisticated, what would they need in order to be able to essentially compete and be able to go through this permitting process and understand what's going on? So we don't have a clear, answer on what the right thing to do is here, but that's just something that we've been thinking through. The other part is the implementation timeline. So how long would DEC need to actually develop and implement new regulations after this law passes? We've actually been in conversation, very preliminary conversations with DEC themselves, who, they're honest about the fact that developing new regulations is a pretty involved process, and that typically they don't see new regulations being developed in a time frame shorter than 1 year. So we're cognizant of that too. And then the third kind of element that keeps coming up is the appropriateness of the square footage cutoff. So right now it's at 50,000 square feet. If you also meet the criteria of being one of those 3 types of warehouses that we talked about before, there's a concern around having this like hard square footage cutoff. What is preventing facility operators, facility developers from just coming in slightly under that cutoff in a way to evade this entire permitting process and requirement. There's also a concern around small business operators. If we're talking about operators outside of the Amazons of the world, UPS and FedExes, are they going to be negatively impacted by this piece of legislation? So now we're kind of at the stage now where, we've been thinking through some of the big questions. We're continuing to think through some of the smaller questions. And so what comes next? So we've been in the process of stakeholder engagement. We've been working with this Last Mile Coalition, a number of community groups that have been organizing historically around environmental issues like this. We've started conversations with labor. I don't know if Ruben is still here, but I'm definitely interested to talk to you from a labor perspective on just kind of your views of this legislation and if there's ways to work together. We want to make sure that, if these facilities are coming, that labor standards are upheld. And then, there's a series of kind of industrial jobs and community development organizations, such as SBIDC that we have here in South Brooklyn. They tend to work more with organizations and companies that are smaller in scale and have members that don't want to be negatively impacted by this sort of legislation. And then the last piece is state agencies. I mentioned DEC. They're the main state agency that would have to implement this law. So we want to make sure that we are engaging them early on in the conversation as well. The next thing we are doing is starting to identify key legislative champions, both in the Assembly and in the Senate. So we're working with Kaveh and ALO, who are both in the audience here, on a New York State mapping project to see, where exactly these facilities are coming to. Is there a way to kind of understand, outside of New York City, especially which legislators kind of have these popping up in their districts? They're much more likely to pay attention if they are actually dealing with this problem in their own districts. So we're starting to think about the strategy there. Then we get to the process of formal introduction, which is, whenever we're ready to push a button and have this thing be published online, we will do that. We're targeting post-budget, which is post-April 1st at this point. I think right now everyone's kind of very focused on the state budget, and it's kind of hard to get airtime for anything else. And then the last thing that we're continuing to do is just organizing in public education. We want as many people to be aware of this, problem as possible, not just within our district, but also outside of it. It clearly is a citywide issue. It's an issue that impacts any district that has a lot of industrial zoned land, the Bronx and North Brooklyn and parts of East New York, especially. So this is something where we really want to spread the word and start to build the grassroots momentum that's going to ensure the successful passage of this law. So that was longer than I was hoping, but I hope that clarifies everything. Definitely curious to hear people's questions and thoughts on where this is all going. And if you have, even after today, if you have questions, feel free to reach out to our office. Myself or someone else from our team can try to answer your questions to the best of our ability.
Thank you so much, Jenny. Really appreciate the thoroughness is appreciated. So thanks for going through that in so much detail. So I would love to just ask if board members have any questions for either of the two presentations that came in. And then we have another discussion presentation from Uprose and
Katie, would you
Justice
like me to
Mothers.
call?
Yes, that would be super helpful. Thank you.
Okay, I have Cynthia Gonzalez first.
Great. Cynthia?
Hi, good evening, everyone. I think that my question could go to both of them, but maybe Christina can identify it because it came to me when she was speaking. One of the things that, in terms of getting these partnerships going and getting organized and trying to find out, who knows about these problems. I know that in Queens, she identified an organization that was working on something like this. But my point is this: I understand that, these facilities are coming mainly to Black and Brown communities, but, behind all of this is the issue of space. In order for these people to come to a community, there has to be spaces that are available to make this so that they can just go in as a right and buy up these spaces. So identifying the spaces, I think, is critical in identifying partners that are going to come in with us in this endeavor, because it may be coming to their community next. Because we have talked for decades about how, there's no space in Sunset Park to build housing. There's no space in Sunset Park to build schools. There's no space. But yet and all, there are spaces for these facilities. So, identifying spaces in all of the 5 boroughs and putting the word out to the legislators in those communities about what might be coming to them next, could possibly help us in this campaign. Thank you.
Cynthia, I'll just say, I think that's absolutely right. And I think that will be our strategy when we introduce the legislation, looking at which council members if it hasn't already impacted them, it will impact them in the near future. But I think we also need to just expand our reach as much as possible. So like I said in the beginning, if you have friends, family members, that they live in the 5 boroughs, talk to them about this issue, encourage them to reach out to their elected officials, so that we really can make this, it is a citywide issue, but, we are being the loudest about it. And how do we get other people to be loud about it as well? I mean, ultimately, on these environmental issues, right, the air quality is going to impact us all no matter what. So just to think about, but definitely, Cynthia, I think you're right on the mark.
Thank you. Catherine, I don't see another hand up, so if I could just briefly correct from the presentation that this is CB7 subcommittee. I'm not aware of what CB6 is doing on the matter.
Got it. Okay, I wasn't sure because I know that joint.
We did a joint meeting in July, but we haven't. Yeah, CB6 is not. Yeah. So thank you. And then I would. I'm gonna actually ask. Let's see, Summer, right? I think Summer is on. Yep. Sorry. Hi, Summer. See you from Uprose. And if you had anybody else, Summer, that you were planning on presenting with.
I will be presenting. Lavinia's on, and then I don't know if we be a little. I see that Alok has joined, and I know he will be helping with answering some questions. If Jeremy, if you're able to like, I guess, bring him forward, bring him up.
I can make him a panelist, but I
Okay.
actually have two Aloks. So
Oh.
with the real Alok, please raise your hand. Thank you very much.
Okay, great. And welcome, Lavina. Sorry, I didn't see you there. And good to see you, Lok. So over to you. Love to have you talk a little bit about the Last Mile Coalition. This is like very much in sequence with where we just landed.
Okay, that's great. Thank you, Katie, and thanks, Christina and Jenny, for those great presentations. Before, I guess, like jump into some of the coalition updates, wanted to make some space for Lavinia to introduce herself. This is her first community board meeting, so wanted to introduce a new staff to everyone. Oh, Lavinia, I don't know if you're able to unmute. Oh, there you go.
Hi, yeah, I'm Lavinia Reynolds. I'm the new policy planner at Uprose. I just started a couple of weeks ago. I'm going to be hopping in on some of the Last Mile Coalition work. I'm really excited to meet all of you and to be working on this issue with you all. I think that's about it.
Thanks, Lavinia. Okay, let me share my screen. Oh, wait.
I see another Alok with the hand up, but hopefully we're okay.
Oh, do you think that's Hillary? Did you both end up using the same link?
Yes,
I was
have to
looking
give
for
her
her
my
name.
link. That's right, yeah.
Okay, can we upgrade both the looks?
So let me I will do that, but I will take the time to scold and say this is why we ask that folks all register, because you deny us knowing who's at our meetings if you share. So I believe, and we could change your name here.
Understood, and thanks. Sorry for that, Jeremy.
No problem.
Thanks, Jeremy. Okay. And could you also just enable me to share my screen?
You can share your screen now.
Perfect. Okay.
Hillary's name is spelled with 1 or 2 L's? I'll do my best.
Thanks, Jeremy. Okay, so hi everyone. My name is Summer Sandoval, she, her pronouns. I'm the Energy Democracy Coordinator at Uprose. I'm here to talk about some of the work from the Last Mile Coalition. I was here pretty much all of the meetings prior to giving updates and being part of this collective in terms of sharing information, giving comments, and also giving periodic updates in terms of deep diving of precedents and models done across the country to address last mile facilities, as this, is not just a South Brooklyn or New York City issue. It's really a national issue that's been happening across cities around the country. Okay, let's see if I can move the slides forward. Here we go. So just a little bit about the coalition. The Last Mile Coalition is coordinated by the New York City Environmental Justice Alliance. Unfortunately, Kevin Garcia is not able to be here tonight, but I think some of you are familiar and maybe have met him. We launched the coalition in this last December. So after our last meeting here together, and since then have been working on putting together an application for a zoning text amendment, which I'll talk a little bit about later. Also just a little bit more about the members of the coalition. So because this really is a citywide issue, member coalitions are environmental justice organizations from impacted communities, which include Sunset Park, Red Hook, North Brooklyn, and South Bronx, along with their technical partners, Earth Justice, for example, and we're joined tonight by Alok Disa and Hillary Adam, who will be helping facilitate and answer specific questions that you may have from the presentation. I don't want to be too repetitive because I know a lot of this was talked a lot about already, and I've already shared the slides with Katie. So if there's any questions on this, we can go through them. But really, I think we're all aligned and on the same page in terms of this is a citywide issue. We're seeing this really move quite quickly in a lot of communities, but obviously specifically in the South South Brooklyn waterfront industrial area, and it's really leading to massive amounts of clustering of these giant facilities. Again, we've also already talked about why this is an issue, why these facilities are not being addressed by the Department of City Planning and not really regulated or limited in any way right now, and how they're basically being able to build giant multi-level big facilities so close to each other, and how as of right now there's no public review or environmental review process. All the issues that we've discussed to date. And of course, what does this mean in terms of basically just high additional amounts of truck traffic and all the impacts that come with additional trucks in terms of noise and pollution and safety, and so much more, of course, impacts on the local economy and small businesses as well. And so really wanting to focus on what we've been doing as a coalition from the time we launched in early December until now. And that's been working together, like I said, with environmental justice organizations across impacted communities throughout the city to create a zoning text amendment that would require a special permit, which would define these facilities and really create these requirements that developers would have to meet, including transparent and accountable reporting, requiring developers to be utilizing clean transportation. Earlier, there was someone had brought up, e-bikes and e-cargo, different types of fleets utilizing the water. South Brooklyn is the largest industrial waterfront. We should be utilizing our ports and our water, maritime transportation ways. And then also looking at creating on-site requirements for these facilities to mitigate and address impacts such as energy uses, such as green infrastructure and other concerns around the impacts of climate and the local community. And so we've been working these last few months, pretty much throughout the winter months, on doing that deep dive and analyses and pulling different pieces from what has been done before in different municipalities and cities and putting that together, and also really working with each other to build political support for this. I think, as you heard before, we've been working with our local electeds. We have the support of Council Member Aviles' office, as well as with our launch, we have the support of the public advocate Jumaane Williams. And so we're building political support around this application, which will be submitted to the City Planning Commission. Let's see, and then also, we've discussed this in the previous two presentations, but this is also the definition that we'll be using in the application to address these facilities. So facilities that are 50,000 square feet or larger and has its primary purpose to be moving goods directly to a consumer. And so one thing I do want to clarify, but I don't know if it's been flagged in this meeting thus far, is we're not here to shame e-commerce, in terms of making people feel bad about needing or wanting or having the convenience of purchasing or receiving goods, via online means. That all of this campaign, all of these efforts are obviously around addressing environmental justice issues and also making sure that people have access to goods without a small handful of the same communities bearing the brunt and the impacts of those facilities. And so that's really also where that justice piece and the equity piece comes from, in terms of why this approach, why some of these requirements and these findings, and that everyone deserves to have access to the goods they need without the disproportionate impacts of these giant facilities and the large, usually diesel trucks and other polluting fleets, impacting a small handful of neighborhoods across New York City, the same neighborhoods that are also already usually impacted by a large number of trucks and other environmental justice problems such as power plants and other things as well, highways. And so lastly, I just want to close on giving some context around timeline. I know we're close on time, so I definitely want to make sure there's enough time for the rest of the agenda. But here, just documenting what I've shared thus far in terms of our work. And since the launch in December, working on putting this zoning text amendment application together. And very excitingly, we are preparing to submit this application in the coming weeks, which is really important. And also just going off of what's been shared thus far, it is super important that we make sure that we are building very strong and wide community and political support for this. This is something we do want to do in coordination with you all. And, I think a good first step in that really is not only from the information we've been able to share to date, but also I know they're sharing these slides, and we put together some fact sheets around this issue as well that we are happy to share and send along. This is, something that's super important, and the sooner we can get something to go live depends directly on the community support and the political support we are able to build around this and these efforts. So I'm going to stop there. I appreciate everyone's time and definitely want to make sure we have a few minutes for questions.
Thank you. Is anyone else from the coalition want to jump in before we open? Alok or Hillary? No? Okay. Great. All right. Really appreciate that. So we're at the section of the agenda. I'm about to go into public comment. And so if you have questions that you want to ask to any of the panelists, I will just say again that, you've got this like trifecta of work that's happening. Summer, your last slide talked a little bit about the timing and introductions. If crystal ball, looking ahead, do you have a sense of timeline once something is introduced? Like what's the typical timeline for something like that?
Hillary, can I bounce that to you?
Sure. So I think it's a little bit of a process with city planning once an application like this is filed, and there will be some back and forth to get the process underway. So it's a little bit hard to predict, and I would hesitate to put a precise time on it. And I guess I'll also mention that, it's this as a community-led effort is also somewhat unusual. And so it's a little bit hard to compare to past efforts. What we're doing here, I think it's a little bit hard to predict. So I would say, months and not weeks, most likely.
Do you want to elaborate a little bit more? You're saying is a zoning text amendment typically generated somewhere else? Do you want to just kind of elaborate a little bit more on your last comment?
Often it's developers who would be submitting this kind of application. So I think it's really important that here, we're using this process that is open to everyone to advance the goals of the community, and allow the community to really participate in this very important process of developing our zoning regulations.
Okay, thanks. And I'll ask one other question. Again, folks then can put their hands up, but we've talked a lot about this emergency that we're feeling and weeks and months and things, we heard from Sasha about 20th Street, our Red Hook neighbors, in a different community, Ward 6, but, we're hearing about stuff going up. Is this so far, this zoning text amendment, sounds like the closest thing to a sooner timeline. What's your response to this emergency? And as we heard earlier about the different types of solutions. Is this the closest to that kind of response as a zoning text amendment?
I mean, I will say that like all the things that we've shared, from that we've heard tonight in terms of the work from the council member and the assemblywoman's office, all of these efforts are definitely complementary to one another. And I think it's just like really unfortunate to say that there's just not a clear timeline, but that basically that kind of goes back to the point where the stronger and the sooner we can build both the community and the political support for just all of this work and this awareness, I think the better chances of these things moving quicker, because we're able to like amplify and try to hold these offices, these agencies a little bit more accountable to addressing this issue right away. I think this gets back at a comment that, Cynthia, you had brought up in terms of like space, that, why is, and about the issue of space. I think this is just getting at exactly that issue, that this is one piece of everything. And we need to be looking, and, this is pointing to a lot of the issues that we need to be part of, matching up the rules that dictate what happens with land use and zoning with the actual priorities of the community, which is, kind of like the underlying work of the grid, where we're looking at, space, in that we have to be proactive when it comes to space and the impacts of climate change, and also those impacts and how they're exacerbated by these private proposals, and these proposals coming from developers that are not accountable to implementing and upholding community priorities in their developments. I know that's a really long way of really not being able to specifically pinpoint a time clock process on all of this. But I hope that we can kind of like from this conversation now, that we can get really excited about a few tangible pieces that have really honestly developed quite quickly, given just how fast everything else has moved just within these last 2 to 3 months. Be able to kind of like walk away from this a little bit more hopeful, and also having a little bit more clear I guess like direction in terms of some next steps before or next convening, in terms of building out that engagement and organizing.
If I could just jump in and build off of what Summer said. First of all, I 100% agree that all of this, it's the ideas, we spend a lot of time coming up with the ideas, but what's going to get them over the top is, it's a political kind of calculation. So, we need everyone to talk to their neighbors, talk to people in other parts of the city and other parts of the state. And since we've last convened, there's been a lot more reporting on this issue, because as Summer mentioned at the top of her remarks, it's also a national and really global issue. And so, there are folks in other parts of the state that people feel like they're fighting alone also. Like, I know people in Red Hook and Sunset Park feel that, but there is a shared experience here. And so the more we do to make that a reality, the more likely we will be to get the wins that we need. In certain communities, I know that actually in the Hudson Valley, there was a community that was faced with really large warehouses, and they were successful through their planning board in getting a temporary moratorium. And that's just through, but they're not connected necessarily to our work. We need to do that work, but I think all of us as citizens need to do that as well to make it really a compelling interest for the state, because there are always going to be competing priorities. And I think Christina mentioned at the top of her remarks, like DCP, city planning is not exactly going to roll out the red carpet to make this happen for us. We have to show them why this is in the best interest of the public. The second point I'll quickly say is, I think all of these are needed. All of these are urgent. We're working very expeditiously on all of them. The state policy, because it's a two-step process, might be a little bit further away, because you need the legislation, or I guess you don't technically need the legislation. DEC could do this on their own, actually. We're just telling them that, hey, you should do this. They do technically have authority to do that right now, but we know they're not leaning that way to do it in any timely way. But regardless, once we'd either pass this legislation and tell them to do these regulations, those regulations will take some time. There are some steps they have to go through. So because that's a two-step process right now, that one might be a little bit, we just need to work to get that across the finish line and make it as soon as possible. But I don't think that's going to be as imminent necessarily as the city level strategies.
Thank you. Thank you. And I know we have the chair of our land use committee, on here, John Fontillis, and, just to say, like, how does it come back to the community board, right? So at the point that you do have city legislation and you do have something that, actually gets to the point of needing to go in front of the community board, that's when it comes back to a group like us, who at that point, at the most local level, have the ability to have a say. Because that's really what we have the ability to do is to have a say. John, do you want to say anything else? I know I evoked your name. If you have any questions or comments.
You manifested my presence. No,
thanks.
Well, we just had a text change, which was the M1 hotel special permit. So, and that was a coalition across the entire city putting together. It wasn't just Sunset Park, but MassPath and Bushwick. There are a lot of districts around the city that all banded together in support of that one item. So I certainly think that's a great way to do it. I think I would agree the state approach, although is I think more lasting, honestly, because it's a state. I think it just has much more force from my point of view. It does have the issue of having to do the two-step and the delay in that. And I don't really have the experience to say if it's likely within the next couple of years, but my experience in hearing about state rules, it's often a long slog to get those things done. And the politics can change very quickly, obviously, with whoever's in office. But I think if we can do the text rule in zoning and get a bunch of communities together to fight against it, I certainly think that's a way to go, in my own humble opinion.
Thanks, John. I'm going to go to questions. People put their hand up, but I am actually, Alok, I'm going to ask one thing that you said, the DEC can do this at the state level. I didn't catch that in Jenny's presentation. So could you also just elaborate a little bit more?
Sure, and I'll have Hillary as the lawyer between us chime in or correct me if I'm getting anything wrong here. But basically, because as Jenny perfectly mentioned in terms of the complex interaction between federal and state and city, there is a carve out in the Clean Air Act that exists right now. And so because that's there for the taking, DEC has the authority to do this right now under the Clean Air Act. It's just, and in fact, in the past, DEC, I'm talking 30-ish years ago, I forget the exact dates, they have had an ISR on a separate issue, not on warehouses, but on a separate issue on the books that they then repealed because it was redundant with some other regulations. And in California, there is the warehouse ISR, but there's also other types of ISRs. You can regulate parking lots and rail yards and airports. And so there's a broad application. The reason we think that the legislation is so important in this instance is because it's a very little used part of the Clean Air Act in general, even though it does have this strong power. And so we don't expect, that agencies are themselves considering it as a tool because it's not used very often. This warehouse ISR in South Coast of in California was the first really bold new ISR in a long time, which is why regulators tend not to think of it as a tool, but it is there. There is the authority that exists right now. We would just be asking them to take it very seriously. And we do feel that it's necessary, the legislation, because DEC, they post what kind of the rule-making agenda for any given year, and this wasn't on their list. They say that they're considering it or they're looking at it, so they do need a little bit of a nudge to get there, but we think they will get there, especially when you consider the CLCPA and the scoping plan and how we're going to meet our emissions reductions across the whole economy. We can't be creating these magnets for emissions and diesel emissions that are going to be primarily in our communities of color and disadvantaged communities. So yeah, I think that's the other thing. If you folks want to just talk to DEC contacts and tell them that this is something you think about, that you think is really important, they could definitely start this process tomorrow if they wanted to.
Okay. Thanks for that clarification. So let's go to public comment, which might include some questions. And I see one hand up. Jeremy, thanks for your help.
No problem. I have Robert Kunkel. Robert, you can unmute yourself.
First of all, I've been working on congestion on highways and how the waterways can actually help to lower that congestion or reduce that congestion for over 10 years now, both with the federal government and in the Connecticut, Long Island area. So bravo for what you guys are looking at here, because the education process and what you have to do to get the state and the cities to understand the problems that come around with it, because diesel fuels and some of the environmental issues that come with these trucking issues are sometimes actually measured in infant deaths. So there's items here that become very important to how we're going to move forward. We had a documentary that was filmed on our project. It's called The Last Line Documentary. It's on YouTube. And we dealt with how the pandemic and how climate change and the fact that Amazon and this type of delivery systems that are being done. So understand in the Connecticut area, we have 5 Amazon warehouses that are already built and operating on a 2-highway system that the governor of Connecticut called a parking lot. So the issue of congestion, the issue of the environmental impact, the climate change impact of what you're dealing with here has been addressed in the documentary. There's a lot of data that goes with it. And as I said before, one of the things you should look at on the mapping is how many of these facilities are near a waterfront and whether or not a waterfront can actually be used. I'll let you know in our in analysis and research that we've done for over the 10 years in Seattle, the majority, if not all of Starbucks inventory is moved by electric cargo bike. So there are so many different ways that this can be addressed and deal with the environmental issues and how all of these products are actually delivered to that final, household. We don't believe it should be food. We've been supporting local family farms and small businesses to try to get away from this movement of everything being dropped on your doorstep. And I just wanted to say, we will reach out to everyone to see if we can get a tour on one of our boats to come down so you can see what we're doing. I'll work on that with Carolina and Portside. And just bravo for the work that you've done here, because I've been looking at it for 10 years. My frustration level is very high, but we are seeing that this Brooklyn area in New York is going to be something that has to be dealt with very quickly.
Thank you. Thank you, Robert.
Thank you.
Summer, if you wanted to just put contact information or for the coalition, if there's anything that you wanted to add. I don't see any other hands, right, Jeremy?
No additional hands.
Okay.
Oh, there's a hand. Whenever you say that, a hand goes up.
Got it.
Thank you.
Hillary.
I wasn't sure what the process was. I did want to mention Bravo as well, and I definitely would be interested in that tour if it's open to members of the public. And I did want to mention that one of the things that the text amendment would try to do is promote alternative delivery modes, including marine transport and e-bike and electric vehicles, and including requiring that a certain percentage of deliveries actually be by marine transport for facilities that are on the water. So that's definitely something that we're looking at. And of course, we're always looking to learn more about that.
Great, thanks Hillary. Okay, so don't see any other hands. I'm just gonna round this out to appreciate the work that has been done. I'm thinking about all the folks that have been on the line, at least when this committee started, right? This has been a conversation that we've been having, but that, those first couple meetings last spring. So, looking at this legislation, looking at these text amendments, and that the work continues. We are going to have a meeting in April. Department of Transportation did not come to this meeting, but it's really important that we are talking. This is under a new administration. We have the letter that this Community Board 7, signed off and sent, and it went to DOT. And we want to do some follow-up to continue sort of in the near term, what are we doing and what does it mean to have all these facilities for streets and traffic? So they'll be invited. We'll announce the April meeting soon. And get that out to folks. And again, we'll make sure we have meeting minutes that come too in terms of websites and things to follow up on. And I want to thank the community board members. We've already had 3 meetings this week, and Jeremy and Maria. And thanks for showing up again tonight to the special subcommittee. So with that, I will end the meeting. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
Good night.
Thank you. Have a good night.
Thanks.